Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry, Leslie, I started a little bit. I think I was a little quick. Go, you start.
No, I'm just excited to have us with Life After College. And let me introduce myself. I'm Leslie Singer of Brown Harris Stevens. I will be the moderator for this amazing panel with Bari Norman, head counselor of expert admissions, Jeff Chapski, founder of Career Ready Coaching, and Sasha DeWind, the CEO of Tutor Associates. But Bari, I know you have a little housekeeping and we have a poll to do, so please.
All right, thanks so much, Leslie. We're so happy to be here and excited to be talking about life after college. For those of you who have joined us before, we're often talking about college-related stuff, and it's nice to be talking about what comes after. So what we'd love to do is just a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat for us. We'll be monitoring that. Many of you also submitted questions in advance, so thank you for that. And we have those in the queue. And then we'd also like to take a poll just to get a sense of who's in the audience. So I'm going to launch it. We're just wanting to get a sense of if you're currently in college, currently in high school, or if you've graduated from college, either you or the applicant that you're here on behalf of. So we have a sense of who we're talking to. If you can believe it, it was just 33% for each of them, but now it's moved. So let's see. It seems to be sorting out. So it looks like we have about 44% currently in college, a third who are graduated already from college, and then 22% currently in high school. So mostly people who are currently in college and thinking about the next step, not surprisingly. So thank you everybody for answering the poll, and I will send it back to Leslie and take it from here.
Well, let's start out with questions regarding testing and what tests are out there for those looking at graduate school, like law school tests, business school, PhD programs, med school.
Sure. Yeah, I can feel that one. So there's a wide array of tests, and actually sort of surprisingly like a wide array of options to even within the certain kind of graduate school that you want. So for example, when you're applying to business schools, they're GMAT, they're open to the GMAT, they're open to the GRE. And GMAT tends to sort of be the typical one, but they all accept the GRE, and some of them even accept the LSAT. So you'd be sort of surprised at how open those programs are. Med school is not so open. It's the MCATs all the way required. There's one test. But even the law schools, you know, LSAT's clearly the test that we all hear about, and it is the favorite, but law schools will also sometimes, you know, accept other tests. So the big ones to know that are out there, the GRE, the GMAT, the MCAT, and the LSAT. And in terms of our students and what kinds of professional lives they're looking for after, what kinds of graduate programs, those are really the four that they're focused on, and which one depends on what kind of program they're looking at and their own strengths, as well as some of the details about the exams themselves.
And Sasha, what's the key difference then between a GRE and a GMAT?
Yeah, those tend to be like the most interchangeable, right? Grad schools or business schools really will say either one. And, you know, they're similar. They both are testing math and verbal. They both have writing sections. You know, I'd say the GMAT is more math heavy. It's harder on the math side. And it's where you can kind of showcase your math skills and your quantitative analysis as well. You know, they're different too in that one, the GMAT is adaptive by question. These tests are adaptive. So that means they changed. If they're online, you're sitting at a test, you're sitting at a testing center, taking them on a computer. We should start there. And, you know, the GRE is adaptive per question. I'm sorry, per section, and the GMAT per question. So, you know, one will adapt based on how you do on a section, giving you your next section, and the other will adapt based on how you do per question. So clearly, though they are similar in their sort of general tone and general set of things they're asking kids to do, they're quite different in their scoring, in their in what specifically they care about on the verbal and what they specifically care about on the math. and specific also, or different also in the way that you actually take them and experience them as a tester.
We're sitting here in May. Bari, what is the timeline for graduate school admissions and when are applications due?
Yeah, so it depends what type of graduate program you're applying to. I would say med school is kind of the one that's the outlier for the most part. If you're applying to med school, the application, there's different kinds of programs and routes to becoming a physician, but the AMCAS application for those applying for MD programs opens around on or sometimes just before June 1st, and you really want to get that application in immediately as soon as it opens if you can. The earlier the better, and the personal statement questions and things are available before, so you can have everything ready. Those applicants are applying at that point. In the primary application, there'll be secondaries that come later, interviews that come later, the process goes on, but that's sort of the starting point. If you're looking at law school, business school, if you're looking at PhD programs or master's programs, those programs tend to be not all that different from those you will remember from undergraduate. Sometimes the applications won't open up until September instead of August, like for undergraduate. Some programs are rolling. It really depends. When you say graduate school, when it comes to applications, it really is, there's the professional schools, which is like law, business, medicine, and then PhD and master's programs and other things. Everything's on its kind of slightly own timeline, but I would say everything except med school is approximately late summer, early fall application starting point, and oftentimes either rolling admission or rounds of deadlines, where the earlier rounds you want to try to get in as early as possible in an early round, but it's really all over the place because it's such a wide range of programs.
Speaking of timing, then, in terms of applications, when should college students start taking tests? During college, after college?
Yeah. I have sort of 3 different types of kids who come to me. They're not kids anymore. So they're kids to me forever, since I've known them since they were in 7th grade, but now they're grownups. And that's actually one of the most incredible parts about they're calling me for this process. But, there are some who really are at their peak performance academically senior year. And I have a lot of kids sit for these tests sort of right at their peak, either during their senior year or right after, especially a GMAT. For, someone who's a computer science, calc double major, at Harvard, have got those, they're ready to go. And, whatever they're doing next in the business world or whatever it may be, it's not likely to be as academic as what they're doing right now as seniors in college. So for those who are ready, I'm all for that. There are other kids who, for whatever reason, they really don't understand these tests, or they need to brush up on a specific thing, like they're strong on the verbal, they need help on the math. Again, they like to do it the summer or the fall after they graduate. Again, keeping those things fresh in their mind. You lose some of those, some of the nitty gritty stuff once you're out of college and into the field working. And then I have young adults who come back to me, right? And they've been working, they've been banking. They didn't have an intention of going to graduate school, and now they've decided it's time for something else. And it's time for them to get sort of back into it. So it depends on the person. But I do think the fresher and stronger you are on those core academic skills, the easier the process, so that you don't need to review. If you need to review, you review, but then you have all this work to do on the processes of the tests. So nice to kind of keep the content fresh before you take them.
I think also just something to add is that it depends, of course, where you're scoring and where you're shooting for. So I've had students, trying to get their MCATs out of the way in their junior year or even senior year of college, depending on when they started. And sometimes that's possible. And sometimes the time and the dedication required to get the score that you need, it just isn't possible to manage while you're juggling whatever final academics you have. If you're applying to med school, you're likely doing clinical or research experience in addition. You're probably not applying to business school right out of college. And so there's often not the overlap, which I think also is why Sasha will see, GMAT is a more common thing to kind of, while you're more in the student and testing mode, to be able to just bang out while you're still in that kind of frame of mind. For LSAT,
Totally
more,
different.
yeah, similar. So it's like, it just depends. And for the professional schools in particular, the test score is so very important as an initial sort of gatekeeper, whether or not you can really be considered or a competitive applicant, that I think it ties back most to sort of what you can achieve where you are. If you can get it out of the way while you're still a student and just, these scores are good for typically 5 years, great. But if you're not where you need to be, these are such important pieces in the review and evaluation process. You're better off prepping for longer or waiting to start prep and devoting, so many people take gap years anyway and don't go right into grad school, and using that time and devoting it largely to that.
And I should say it's important that whenever you test, particularly on these tests, not so much on the GRE, but on all the other ones, that those scores are going to be on the record, right? Like they're not, it's not like college where you have as much control over what they see. And so I think Bari's always in favor of that concise testing portfolio. It's no different for graduate school. You're not trying to show them 6 GMATs. You're trying to show them that one that is the score that puts you in the percentile. They're very clear about the scores they want. They're online. They tell you what they want. And particularly for MCAT, for LSATs, and for business schools, I mean, for the professional schools, Bari, it's very important. And it's very important that it's not many times or that you're testing when you're not ready. So it's, as Bari said, all about preparedness. And when I was talking about testing, I really was thinking about the GRE and the GMAT. When it comes to LSAT and MCAT, it's rarely senior year, I would say. I mean, occasionally you see it, but I was thinking about my tutors who have been out and they're amazing. And part of why they want to be educators in between, Harvard and medical school is so that they can continue their chemistry and their biology and their math, because the MCATs are going to come up in a couple of years. So I think when you're talking LSATs and MCATs, it's all about when you're applying and when you plan on doing that rigorous work to get that score that is so important for those professional programs.
So Sasha, graduate schools see all the results?
GRE allows you to control things, and you can cancel scores or dates, but they'll see the cancellations. So yes, your record is there. So as Bari said, the scores are great for 5 years. That's great. So if you are a strong senior year and you want to take them, you don't know where you're applying, you can take some time and figure that out. But these scores will likely be seen, and even the record of your cancellation. So important to take it seriously. Yeah, it's a little bit of a different game than college admissions.
Yeah, in college admissions, you can cancel scores and they don't see that you've canceled. You can withhold scores that you don't want to be seen, even though they're on your record. You don't have the same level of control for these scores. And just like the colleges, whatever you give them, they will evaluate. Whatever the graduate school committees look at, they are going to evaluate. And so you want that concise and efficient testing profile.
And for Jeff, not all students are going immediately on to graduate school. So can you talk a little bit about how a career coach can help help a college student or a recent graduate, and what your role is?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a really important time for those college students who are either about to graduate, if they're about to graduate without a job, or undergrads who are coming to the end of the semester and looking for internships. The way I work, and I specifically focus on college students and recent graduates in my work, and I generally, my clients fall into 2 categories. So one is, I'm a fill in the blank, whatever major. I don't know what I want to do with that, right? I don't know what my career path and what my career options are going to be. And so what a career coach will generally do with a person like that is provide some assessments and some resources to allow them to explore what their skills, their values, and their interests are. to really help them narrow down the options. The second general category of person that I work with, somebody who has a pretty good idea of what they want to do, but they're not sure how to start. The best, the job search process or the internship process in college can sort of be equated to or likened to the college admissions process. But the difference being, that was what, first of all, that was several years ago. Second of all, there were many adults around you at the time, right, to help you with that. There were high school counselors and parents and admissions experts like we have on the call today. Many college students are really almost left on their own to find their way. Many do, many are able to find their own way, but many struggle. And that's where a career coach can help.
For people though that, let's say you've graduated or will graduate without a full-time job, what can they be doing right now? I'm sure that's a big concern for a lot of people at the moment.
Sure, and it's very tempting to think about graduating and taking the summer off, and there's certainly some opportunity to recharge. But what I do, and I'm working with some people now in this situation, but what I like to do is you've really got to get a full plan in place. And what I mean by that is the most difficult question you're going to have to answer is, how are you spending 40 hours a week? And so you need to devise a plan that might include a little downtime, but also fills that time so that when you do get those interviews later in the summer or fall time, you have a really good answer to that question. And that's a combination of job search, maybe paid or unpaid internships, part-time jobs, maybe some volunteer work, maybe some continuing education, right? So it's about filling out those 40 hours so that you come across as a serious candidate.
I would think a lot of this for Bari would go also into a graduate school application. Can you talk a little bit about what goes into the application? And is it just like undergraduate? Because I would think work experience, et cetera, would be part of this.
Absolutely. So again, I'll try to answer efficiently, even though we're talking really across graduate programs. It really is so specific to each kind, but I would say it's most people who are certainly going into the professional schools are taking at least a year off. For a business school, at least 2 to 4 years, oftentimes even like on the higher end of that, in between college and grad school. And what you do is very much a part of your candidacy and sometimes a necessary prerequisite even for realistically being able to be considered. So if you're applying to med school, you need clinical experience, you need research experience. There's different types of clinical experience that you want to, kind of have a range. There's certain different types, patient facing, non-patient facing. All of these things, even if you knew going into college that you wanted to go to med school, it's tough to get as much of all of these different types of experiences in while also being an undergrad. And so people need the time, not only for the MCAT, but also to build up their candidacy. The same thing will go in a similar vein for business school applicants. Realistically, you need at least 2 to 4 years, at least 2 years, but 2 to 4 years, again, more on the higher side of work experience, and not just work experience. They're looking at what you do outside of your work life as well. Same for med school, similarly for law school. So a lot of times what you do in your gap year or gap years are very much connected. It's the connection between sort of whether career, job, internship, whatever, and that next step, that sort of bridge to the candidacy for whatever professional or graduate program you're applying to. So they're very, very much connected and really should be part of your strategy, not only in terms of where you think you're able to apply, but the question of when to apply to graduate programs is very, very important. You could have a student, or an applicant who from 1 year to the next, literally just 1 year, can go from really having essentially like very low to no chances of getting in, let's say, to a top program, to being a very, very strong candidate just by virtue of the outside experience that they get through a job or a career, an internship or something like that. So it's super, super important, and really very much an extension. It's almost like the extracurricular piece for college on steroids in a way.
So Jeff, what would you say are the most important career skills that a college graduate needs to acquire, given what Barry just said?
Yeah, no, it's I mean, there are some basics, and I'm really focused here sort of on the undergrad levels. So the ones that I think are important, there's dozens, but I focus on a bunch that I think are really important, and networking is really at the top of my list. You know, I describe it as this brand new type of relationship that as a 20-something-year-old person, you've probably never had this type of relationship before, which is part of what makes it challenging and might feel a little awkward in the beginning, but there are some really basic things and basic steps you can do to get more comfortable. Business writing, in the case of just, you know, if you're not an English major and you were a business major or an accounting major, you did less writing. Being able to communicate effectively. Public speaking is a surprising skill that many recent graduates that I talk to will say, well, I didn't realize I had to do that as a finance major. And it may be something as simple as your weekly meeting, you know, in your business group. You might have a dozen people, but that's still a public speaking opportunity, and one that you know, with the right skill, you can really use to set yourself apart. So those are some of the key ones that I really focus on.
Fantastic. Actually, this kind of segued into another question. Well, not really, but I was curious. Anyway, how has undergraduate trends towards test optional impacted grad school views on standardized testing?
Yeah, so the grad schools seem to be the sort of, they're steadfast. I mean, there's always been programs who never cared about scores. There's lots of humanities, masters and PhD programs. And I mean, there's lots of programs that pre-COVID didn't require scores and still don't, but nothing has really changed for the most competitive professional schools or for the STEM PhD programs. They want scores. They're very specific about what they want. I haven't seen any shift towards sort of like test optional or test blind the way that we've seen, at least temporarily, in the college admissions world. We'll see how temporary it is.
There was news this past week. The American Bar Association announced that it was basically clearing the way if law schools wanted to go test optional, which was like big news. It's not that they're going test optional. It's not that any of them said they would, but it was sort of opening up. It was a big deal. It was sort of just opening it up. But like Sasha said, you know, I wouldn't go into any graduate program, and certainly not a top program, and think that going in, even when given the option, although again, it's not really an option at this point, that would be the strongest strategy, even if there is anything that comes of that.
So we've talked a lot about GMAT, kind of med school, et cetera, but can you, anyone, talk about how do you know which programs are the best for a specific subject, classics versus neuroscience?
Sure. So for when it comes to when we say the professional schools, we're typically talking about law, business, and medicine. And so those, let's sort of put those aside. Typically, by the way, different from the way people approach the undergraduate process. Even if you're looking at top schools as an undergraduate, know that you want to go to, you know, a top school, however you define that. Very rarely to students and families that I work with are they sitting there with like rankings and literally looking at them and going based on that. Whereas in professional schools, you really do like tend to look at the rankings and see where they're ranked, and that will often play a pretty significant role in which program somebody applies to. Though certainly certain business schools are going to be niche for something. Certain law schools are going to have better opportunities, maybe if you're interested in government versus something else. You know, there are nuances for sure, but people do tend to focus a bit more on the rankings, or for business schools, which are the M7, like top programs, things like that. when it comes to either terminal master's programs, meaning programs that end in a master's degree, or PhD programs, which sometimes wrap a master's up into the program or skip it all together and just award the PhD, it will come down a lot to what your particular area of interest is especially relating to research. What faculty members are involved in at each particular program. So if you're applying to a PhD program, you're going to be looking at the different departments and who the faculty are and what their work is in and how it matches up with what you do and what you've done, presumably in college and perhaps after. More likely that you would be heading into a PhD program without the gap year than relative to the professional schools. And then when it comes to things like terminal master's programs, sometimes there's financial accounting, there's computer science, there's different kinds of things. Again, it's going to get into the nuances of what you want to study and also what you're using the graduate program for. So if your goal is to go into academia, you're going to look at certain programs and schools that have more of a track record of basically producing teachers, professors, something like that. If you want to go into industry, that's a whole different thing. If you want to go into research, again, it depends so much on the path that you're taking. And I think it's so important. Grad school is supposed to be, listen, you could argue that we never figure out exactly what we want to do, but you go to grad school when you know what you want. It is a means to an end. It is a bridge to the next thing that you want to do. And typically you're going to grad school because you need it to do whatever it is you want to do. You go to law school because you want to be a lawyer. You go to med school because you want to be a physician. You might be going to a PhD program because you want to be a professor. But like to go to law school because you don't know what else to do and it's a good degree to have is usually not the best approach. It's a common way of thinking, but you really want to think about why do you need this? Why are you using it? And by the way, if you know that, you're going to write better essays and have a better chance of getting into the programs that you want to get into. So I think a lot of it is a longer answer, but I think there's a piece about why are you going to graduate school? What are your interests? And kind of taking the balance of between those two things and figuring out which is the best one for you. There are rankings and things like that, but when you're not talking about the professional schools for master's and PhD programs, it really will come down to your particular area of research interest.
And while you're trying to figure out what your interests are or where you want to go, Jeff, can you talk a little bit about why one of these questions is, why can't my son, my daughter use the Career Center on campus as opposed to a coach like yourself?
Yes, I encourage everyone I work with to use all the resources that are available, but there are some pretty shocking facts about college career centers. I'll share a couple of them. So the national average budget for college career centers is about $30 per student. So after the staff, they spend about $30 per student for programming. The other one is even more shocking. This is pre-COVID data, and I expect it only got worse. But the ratio of students to career center professional is close to 3,000 to 1. And the way colleges went through COVID, I expect that number is significantly higher. So there are often pretty good resources. By the way, another good place to look for career resources at many colleges and universities is a alumni association. Oftentimes have databases, programs, events, webinars, networking events, things like that, where it'll help students connect with alumni around profession and career. So I encourage everyone to use all the resources that are available, but you may very seriously run into access issues, time issues, being able to get the full attention of staff people. And their job, while very well intentioned, is to try to get as many students through their offices as they can because they're so short-staffed. Whereas a career coach can work one-to-one and really focus on, the student or the recent graduate.
And also I think that kind of echoes something Jeff was saying earlier, is that, it's almost like we get them to college and then we let go. But, the four of us all need help. We need modeling, we need mentors, when we try new things at work, we learn and we need to learn them. And these are very young adults, right? Who, as Jeff was saying, they don't even know what the networking, what does coffee look like? How do you ask for that? What does it look like afterwards? And so I think we also have to remember that young adults, are still young adults, and they have a lot of autonomy and a lot of, and very high cognitive abilities. And they haven't yet lived as grown-ups for very long, especially if they're in college or recently graduated. So I just wanted to just quickly normalize again what I thought was so lovely what Jeff was saying is like they need the same help they did in high school. It looks different, it feels different, they're different. But one-on-one coaching, one-on-one tutoring, one-on-one varies, like, and this program and that program, and you can see how quickly the generalities fall apart, and it becomes about the specific child or young adult who needs the help with that specific test or that specific skill, or for Bari, needs help understanding, what gets you into a ranked top 10 law school, what precedes that, and then how do you build that, and then how does your application get you in? So we all need help, right? Best help is always the best.
When you're talking about whether it's terminal master's programs, PhD programs, the professional schools, it also ties into academic advising at the college, which we know is woefully inadequate, from Ivy League schools to the small liberal arts colleges that we assume just have the best of the services just by virtue of being small. But students of ours who either come back, who were with us for college, or new students who come, as they embark on graduate school, the advising, similar to what Jeff was saying about the career services, I mean, they are moving through a lot of students, and it has been, I'm not shocked anymore because it's done this long enough at this point, but for a long time was quite shocked and surprised at how little guidance, even if you have, and most of them do, a pre-health professions advisor or a law school advisor or your academic advisor. Oftentimes it's more just sort of approving courses, or maybe, and you might get lucky and have someone great, but I just have so many students who are applying to med school or applying to business school, really flying blind, like not asking me questions like I know, what kind of research opportunity or like a clinical experience that's available like around their university that like their pre-health advisor hasn't even mentioned that you need it. They're just kind of signing off. Yes, you met the pre-med requirements, fill out the forms so we can fill out our forms. And with no conversation about being a competitive applicant and helping them find what they need to do to build their profile. So it ties into not just the career office, but the advising offices on campus as well.
And it also ties into what Jeff was saying about networking, because it actually starts with your professors too. When you find a mentor in college, not the advisor who helps you with health pre-med stuff, but when you really find someone who's invested in you, either, in college or adults around you in the world. And I have so many young adults I'm so invested in, and I spend all my time mentoring and helping and giving them advice. And I think it's so, anyway, I just think that piece of it happens with professors too. And especially if you're going the PhD route or even the pre-med route, getting that lab job over the summer with that professor has somewhat to do with the relationship, not just the content of your work. So I think that sort of early sense that like the relationships you build, who you impress, how invested you are in the work you do and in the people that are older than you and around you and your mentors. I mean, it's really does make that difference for those opportunities.
And like the college process, there'll be recommendation letters that are required as well. And so it's all, an ongoing process.
Bari, actually, can you elaborate more on what actually goes into the graduate school application?
Yeah, sure. So again, speaking generally, because we're speaking across programs, Generally speaking, you're going to have a main application. Law school goes through LSAC. Med school, if you're doing MD programs, goes through AMCAS. The business schools tend to have their own thing. And also same thing, it'll be institutional applications for master's and PhD programs. But you're going to have let's call it a general application. There will be what we'll call a personal statement, which how you approach one for business school versus medical school versus law school, and certainly versus PhD programs, extraordinarily different, but a personal statement, that's more of a general statement. And then depending on the type of program you're applying to and which school you're applying to, oftentimes additional supplemental essays as well. Also recommendation letters, again, slightly different requirements across programs. Standardized test scores, again, not optional on the graduate front, certainly very different from the undergraduate. And I would say, like, generally speaking, those are the main components. What each of those looks like within within the application, of course, you've got the extracurricular piece, if you would, to use the language of the undergraduate piece, but your sort of outside of school involvements and things like that. The nuances within, are specific to the type of program and the type of school. But I think in terms of the general pieces, they sound quite familiar for those who have been through the college process. What they look like and what, the barometer is, for each thing is different, but it will feel a little bit like deja vu to some extent.
Will there be a common app within each different type of application, program?
So for the professional schools, generally speaking, yes. So like medical school, law school, not as much, not for business school, and not for the PhD and terminal master's program. So for med school and for law school, you're going through LSAC and AMCAS, and there are other medical programs that people might apply to for DO and other types of things. But we'll put that aside for now to keep it simple. But there is a common application, if you would. It's not called that. It's totally different, company and space. But for law school and for med school, yes.
And would you, and Jeff, anyone can kind of just chime in here, though, for different programs. And I know you've touched upon this a bit. Are there different kinds of work that you should be doing in advance of applying?
Yes, very different. Like med school is its own like animal. It's like a whole like thing. And there's so many components of what type of work and how many hours of each kind of work. And I mean, like that could be its own webinar. So med school has very, very particular kinds of things that you need to do. Law school is more open-ended. It's not that you should be doing something completely unrelated to the law, but what is related to the law, depending on your interests, can look very different. There's more of a range of what people are doing, I would say, in between, let's say, college and applying to law school. Business school, I think people think there's a very direct and kind of typical way, but that makes it harder for you to get in if you take that typical kind of standard banking, finance sort of route. So you're going to see a lot of people going that route, but from a strategic standpoint of getting in, it's not your best choice. So ideally, you are thinking also a bit more broadly. I often see that for students who are applying to business school, that their sense of what is good preparation is so much narrower than reality, and certainly the opposite of what would benefit them in the long run when it comes to getting in. And then when it comes to things like PhD programs or terminal master's programs, it's very much focused on the exact thing that you want to research down to like the most minute little point.
And we have a question that refers to kind of older children and parenting, but I actually think this could be even for the younger, so anyone, Jeff, Bari, Sasha, please jump in. But how directive do you recommend parents be when a children seems to be a bit uncertain?
Well, I encounter this oftentimes when there is a student who has graduated or about to graduate without a job, and parents are struggling to figure out how to help. For each parent-child relationship, it's very different. So, I'm being very general here, but instead of being so focused on the tactical nuts and bolts of, are you applying to jobs, interviews, things like that, what I try to encourage parents to do is to talk about their own job search experience, their own college to career transition. And remember how challenging it was, and really share those experiences and those stories, and what you did, not in a prescriptive way, but simply what you did to overcome or face those challenges, whether it was at the beginning of your career or anywhere in the career process. I'm a firm believer. I've got a 14-year-old, and I know that what I say to him versus what his basketball, I could say the same thing that his basketball coach says to him, and he'll listen to his basketball. That's the nature of kids. And so oftentimes I'll say the same thing to parents, which is, I can say the same thing that you're going to say, but they're going to hear it differently from me. And the best thing that you can do is be supportive, try to relate as best you can to the situation they're in, which is extremely pressure filled when it feels like all of their friends are getting jobs and they're not, and they're facing a summer moving back home and they don't have a plan, and they don't have let somebody else walk them through the steps and the tactics of the job search and the resume and the LinkedIn profile and all those things. And the best role the parents can play is, one, relating and being supportive, and two, potentially opening up their own network. Again, not so much go talk to this person because they have a job for you, but go talk to this person who's in my network, who you might learn from. You might learn about an industry, you might learn about a company, you might just do nothing more than practice doing what it is to network with other people in a professional context. And so that's typically the advice that I would give to parents.
And I just want to, I think that's great advice. And I also would add something that is true from when they're babies to when they're, I have babies still, but I work with teenagers and people in their 20s all day. And I guess there's a few things I always say. One is that, and this is what Jeff was saying about each child, right? One is, your job as a parent is always, and I struggle with this, but to be attuned to your child. So you can't do that if you're just talking. Like, to be attuned is to watch. So some children need this and some children need that, and they need different things at different times, and if they're not always the same. And so step one to me is always like, be attuned. What is your child experiencing? Just watch, and two is like the validate, right? Like, instead of being like, well, it'll be okay, or, it is hard. It does suck. Like, that is rough, or I get it. And then the third thing I'll say about this particular time is, I think there's a lot of regression emotionally for young adults as they go, or for all people, as we go forward, we also need to come back. Like, there's a going forward and a coming back. And that's what Jeff was describing, this moment of like, well, I'm a grown-up now, but I'm a kid, I'm a grown-up, but I'm a kid. And I think as a parent, respecting both moments, just like we do with our teenagers, just like we do with our 7 and our 3-year-olds, the moments where they need to be babies and the moments where they need to be autonomous from us. So those are my little, like, always parenting advice. And then I'll try to take that advice when my toddlers start.
And also, though, I think, just one other point is that this is also a time where, what does everybody ask somebody who's a senior in college? What are you doing? Did you have a job? People do it to the kids who are 11th graders and 12th graders too, for some reason. I don't know why people don't think, and everybody asks it, but it creates such enormous pressure when you're constantly being asked it and put on the spot and feeling judged, or feeling just anxious, depending on what your answer is. And so I just think that adds so much to it, and sort of remember that, like, they're being kind of put under the microscope, like constantly in that year, especially. But even as they're juniors, people say, what do you think you're going to do after college? It's like, it starts earlier and earlier. And I just think that adds a lot. And it's, important to keep that in mind too.
I remember sitting next to a college senior a few years ago, and I sat down and I was about to say, so what are you doing, next? And he said, oh, thank goodness you didn't ask me what to do next. And I just thought, that's right, I didn't, and I will never ask again. It was 10 years ago, but I thought, that's great, I didn't ask.
Jeff, can you talk about maybe how a college junior then can help navigate having a career coach? Would that help navigate all of this that we're talking about?
So by the time people are in junior year, oftentimes they have a pretty good idea, at least of what they're graduate as a major, hopefully, but still may not know what to do with it. Right, they're an English major, but they think they want to work on Wall Street, or they're, whatever the examples are. So that work is really around, okay, so what do you do with these skills? How do you define, identify, and highlight these transferable skills from what you've learned in school and internships and other work that you've done? How you become, and it's interesting, this ties very much in a different way back to, Barry, what you were saying about the applications. What I talk to my clients about is being an authentic candidate. So whether you're, I think would be true in the case of grad school applications, but is absolutely true in the case of interviews and job search process. When you're sitting across the table from somebody and you say, I want this job, what I would say is, okay, well, why? Show me where in your background you've demonstrated something beyond the words that you just told me. Demonstrate why you want this job. Have you done something similar? Have you talked with people in the field? Have you done a similar, maybe a special project in school? Like, prove to me that you actually, that there's something behind those words. And so that's another thing that I can begin working with juniors on, is really coming up with their story. They might be 100% convinced inside that they know what they want to do, and that's terrific, but do they have the proof? And for those students, those juniors who don't know, there's an opportunity for an internship, obviously, if that's not already been in place. But one of the other things that came out of the pandemic, started before, but really accelerated, and I just want to mention the term for people on the call tonight, is there's something called micro internships. So this idea, and many of them are virtual. So even if your junior summer, kind of your last opportunity for an internship, maybe you've already made your choice at this point. Once you go back to school in the fall, you may still have opportunities to do week-long, 2-week-long, maybe something over the winter break, where you can either go deeper into an area that you're interested in to, again, accumulate this proof, or explore something different, right? That maybe you didn't have a chance to before. So that's an important term for people to know and to explore. And there's a number of resources that are available for micro internships, and I can provide those if anyone's interested.
That's fantastic.
I'll just say also, as someone who does a ton of interviewing and hiring, there's lots of people with perfect scores, with amazing resumes, who, as Jeff said, there's an issue in the authenticity, in the commitment, in the values matching what I do, and that's. It doesn't matter what your resume looks like or what you look like on paper. Should your interview, should your presence, I think Barry says the same thing about the application. They know if you don't really want it. They know, they're good at knowing, what they want and finding those people. So are employers. We're good. If we're good at our job, we're good at knowing what we want and finding it. And so it's a similar thing to the graduate school application or the college admissions process. It's that specificity, but also the underlying commitment and values that employers are looking for.
Yeah, I think also when it comes to the application process, oftentimes people are thinking about, like, what do I need to do to get in? Which of course makes sense as an initial sort of framing of things, but there's a sort of, what do I need to do? And then that you have to think of that as sort of like a baseline. Like, of course, if you do nothing related to what you're applying for, you have no chance, right? So I think people kind of think, oh, so I need to, do this kind of job, or I need to have this kind of experience. And then with that, now, like, I'm qualified. But you have to remember, like, everybody is going to match in some way, right? I did something in this, so I'm here applying to business school. I did these things, so I'm here for med school. Then you have to compel them to pick you. And by the way, that goes whether you're going for a job interview or you're getting picked for a graduate program. And there's so often this focus on match, and it's not about match, it's about fit. And that goes again, whether you're applying for a job or you're applying for a graduate program. And when it goes more into the admissions piece, it's not just what you did or that you did it. It's how did you make it better? How did you change it? Not just that you showed up and we could have taken your body out and put somebody else and the same thing would have happened. And it's your job as the candidate to communicate that and to have like set up the experiences and thought out your strategy and your process to have those opportunities before you. And I really think it applies to all the things that we're talking about, but the admissions people, like, they got way too many people to be playing around. Like, they don't have the flexibility. So if you just show up qualified, like, that's never going to be enough. And in any kind of competitive job market or admissions, admissions round or whatever, like, it's never going to be enough. And I think then people are like shocked and disappointed, and shouldn't be so shocked or disappointed. You really, really have to be intentional, and it has to be like very, very particular to you. Not something that's never been done before, but very particular to you.
This is all amazing, amazing advice. It's a wonderful time. If we haven't answered some of the questions, Bari, can you just take a quick look at the chat?
Yeah, we've got those questions covered. If there are any final questions, feel free to paste them into the chat.
Okay.
And otherwise, thanks to everybody for joining us tonight.
Such amazing, amazing advice. And I know that everybody will get all your contact details, because I'm sure questions will come up as we progress.
Yes, we will send out a recording and include our contact information. So if anyone has follow-up questions after digesting everything that we talked about, you'll be able to contact us. So thanks to everybody for joining us. Have a good night.